This poster was produced by the People's Movement of Ireland during the referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. It graphically illustrates what effect this repackaged European Union constitution would have on working people and the public services that they rely on. That is why it was overwhelmingly rejected by Irish voters on June 12, 2008.
It's the only country in the European Union which allowed the people to vote. And so when they say, oh well, it's only 1% of the population, whatever it is, the point they miss is not a single other country was allowed to give an opinion on the matter.
All the key features of the original constitution are retained in the Lisbon Treaty. Lisbon would still give the EU a single legal personality so that it can act like a state in its own right. EU laws would still have primacy over national laws, and member states would effectively become provinces of a new superstate. Yet EU laws can only be made by the European Commission, which is unelected and unaccountable and hugely influenced by corporate lobby groups. It gives sweeping new powers to the EU's own court, the European Court of Justice, to ensure that EU law is implemented in the member states. This court has already made some draconian judgments striking down workers' rights.
This politically motivated court is an EU institution designed to enforce EU laws and extend the so-called internal market, regardless of national laws. ECJ judgments on the Viking, Laval, Rufus and Luxembourg cases have, in different ways, all found in favour of big business and against workers.
Now, Article 43 of the European Treaty protects freedom of establishment. That is to say, the right or the freedom of companies in one European state to set up a branch or a subsidiary in another European state.
The ECJ is asserting that EU rules on the free movement of goods, services, capital and labour give private firms protection against collective action by trade unions.
So a human right has got less importance than the commercial freedom of companies to set up across borders in Europe.
The free rulings on their own basically are the components of what the European Union stands for, and that's basically free trade. There can be no frustration, no restriction for basically capital to get the biggest profits possible.
When you think that trade unions are really the force to protect workers' interests, the impact is very serious indeed, and the trade union movement really has got to wake up and do something about this. These judgments cannot be permitted to stand.
Lisbon gives the EU institutions the power to decide when and how industries and public services should be privatised. Article 147 of the old constitution says a European framework law shall establish the measures in order to achieve the liberalisation of a specific service. That article is still in the Lisbon Treaty.
We were one of the first countries to be privatised within the European Union, to see what the breaking up of the railway industry would do, how people can make money, and how that could be spread throughout the length and breadth of the European Union and beyond.
The EU's a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of in love with business models, really, just as much as this government is. It does think that businessmen, businesswomen, business generally has a kind of answer that the state doesn't have.
A European Union directive in the 90s said that the operations and the infrastructure had to have separate accounts, that one didn't rely upon the other.
A very, very ideological decision, in fact, to create the idea of competition on the railway.
It also enshrines neoliberal economics as a constitutional goal, something that does not exist even in the US Constitution.
Yeah, but it's the only constitution in the world which is committed to capitalism. I mean, the American Constitution would allow a socialist government to be elected in America. There's no constitutional objection to that, whereas in Europe they couldn't because of the capitalism is embedded in the Constitution. It's a very, very strange development because it runs totally counter the desire of people to have a different sort of society.
Lisbon also abolishes the national veto in over 50 new areas, including transport, and this would rob member states and parliaments of the right to decide their own transport policy. New Zealand has recently renationalised its rail network. Under Lisbon, member states could not do so. Lisbon lays the basis for an EU army with a single EU foreign policy and the development of a European military industrial complex. This would allow the EU to carry out military adventures in its own right.
Sometimes I like to compare the European Union as a creation to the organization of empires. The empires. And because we have the dimension of empires.
In short, Lisbon seeks to create a free fire zone for big business in Europe and beyond, where business rights to make money override democracy, trade union rights and social protection. It is a recipe for social dumping and a race to the bottom in terms of wages and conditions, which would increase the exploitation of workers in the name of profit.
Supposing America was governed by commissioners instead of by a president and a Congress, there'd be an outcry. If Britain was governed by commissioners, you know, we had elected members of parliament who were controlled by people we didn't elect, we wouldn't accept it for a minute. But Europe, we're told, oh well, this is what's required for internationalism. It's not at all. It is an absolute charter for multinational corporations to run Europe. And I think in the end, for that reason, if for no other, people will reject it.
On June 4th, 2009, lend us your vote in the European elections. Vote no to EU, yes to democracy. Make a difference.